let's jump into the PC game article. It was going to transform into a giant spider that launched eggs and had babies running around. Bungie devs discuss Destiny 2's next class. By the way, there's an article by Tim Clark. We'll link his Twitter down below. Excellent writer. We talked to Kevin Giannis and Eric Smith about why Strand is the highest APM class and how they're a little bit scared of it. We're into the final straight before Destiny 2 Lightfall launches, and Bungie is firing off new information at frankly bewildering rates. And they are going wild with it. Today, it's the turn of Strand, which is the new damage type being added. As such, it comes with 3 new subclasses, which the developer has broken down in detail on his site, along with the trailer embedded above. Or I was given a preview of this stuff last week and the chance to talk with design lead Kevin Giannis and future lead Eric Smith and put questions about Strand and ability design to them. It was a wide-ranging discussion taking in everything from what the actual power fantasy of Strand is, through how to buff roaming supers, and most incredibly, why we'll not be transforming into giant egg-spewing spiders anytime soon. Here are the highlights. Honestly, when you think about it, Warlocks, it's kind of what it is. You know, y'all are literally like spitting out these like spider-looking things everywhere. Strand will be easier to unlock than Stasis. Right off the rip, let's deal with one of the biggest worries when it comes to Strand. How long the subclasses will take to unlock across all 3 characters. Acquiring all aspects and fragments for Stasis and Beyond Light was notoriously grindy, but Bungie promises that won't be the case with Strand. We learned a lot from the Born in Darkness quest, said Giannis. The friction there was way too high, especially for a new player who were coming in and just wanting to see the new stuff. Unlocking Strand will still require players to complete the Lightfall campaign, but Bungie seems to have heard the complaints and wants to make the process much more user-friendly. At campaign completion, you're actually going to have a fairly representative subclass, unlike Stasis, which is just a skeleton of a subclass. That's good. I actually wonder what other benefits are going to come from the legendary campaign outside of like the exotic, right? But that's good. And honestly, the goal should be to use Strand during the campaign, and I'm sure they're going to incorporate that. You can also expect more aspects and fragments to be released as part of the seasonal model over the course of 2023. By the end of the year, you're going to have a complete subclass kit that'll be able to stand toe-to-toe with your existing suite of powers and speak to a playstyle you currently don't have, says Giannis. My takeaway is that although it does sound like you'll need to play the campaign on each character to unlock Strand, you're going to have more freedom to choose what you unlock, and it should feel less laborious. Certainly, I don't expect to be doing the equivalent of scalping around and map shooting crystals with Salvation Script this time around. Strand is the high APM class, actions per minute. I have to confess that before the interview, I still didn't totally get the power fantasy of Strand beyond the obvious appeal to Spider-Man enjoyers. Where it clicks for me is when Smith and Giannis start talking about how Strand is the high APM or actions per minute class. Bungie wants Strand to play completely differently than the light subclasses and Stasis, which already offer a bunch of different ways to mount monsters and control crowds of mobs respectively. They needed to find a different role for Strand. We almost stumbled into the APM idea, said Giannis. We found it, embraced it, and kept going. The key there is it's really easy to get in and start messing around with Strand and have fun, but it has the depth to reward people who explore. Things like grappling a tangle and throwing it, and then grappling to the same tangle and following up with a grapple punch. That's something you cannot do with any of the other subclasses. But when you string those actions together, you feel like a god. So I would argue and say, again, Bungie has talked about in the past where they go, we don't think of Destiny as a movement game. And then we obviously refuted that and said, no, we think of Destiny as a movement game. And so I feel like Bungie's like, okay, you want movement? Here's a movement. And then they give us Strand. And I actually think that is a consequence of that conversation. Strand will need defensive and offensive output if you're going to handle the new Tormentor enemies on the Amuna. So image credit Bungie. Tangos are the Warmind cell replacement. Hence the explosion. But you could do way more with it. Well, unless you start talking about Warmind cell builds. Okay, let's talk about Tangos. Whenever an enemy that's affected by any sort of Strand debuff dies, it will unravel into a swirling, volatile bundle of Strand. It's called a Tangle. You can pick up a Tangle and then throw it as a bomb or shoot it where it lies. You can also grapple to a Tangle without spending your ability charge. As you expect from Destiny, various subclass aspects and pieces of exotic gear will generate or interact with Tangles. For example, the Quicksilver Storm exotic auto rifle creates Tangles from kills in the grenade launcher mode, provided you have its exotic catalyst. Smith thinks that Tangles are key to the high APM experience. You'll see these things pop up and use your instincts to alter the way you approach the encounter. We wanted to give Strand this high APM skill ceiling where if I chain all these things together in a dynamic way, I'm going to really maximize my effectiveness. Guys, Quicksilver Storm creating those tangles, it's going to be pretty wild. Like, no, it may not be like a DPS monster, but just launching those grenade launchers and then being able to play off of those tangles, and then the synergy with the subclass itself, that's going to be very, very good. Now, as players have already speculated, tangles are effectively the replacement for Warmind cells, which are being deprecated as part of the huge revamp coming to the mod system with Lightfall. Tangles came from our desire to take Warmind cells, wrap part of that loop, and bring it into the core gameplay, confirms Giannis. We knew Warmind cells were going to go away. They were never really intended to live forever. And so the question became, what's a class-based version of Warmind cells that's cohesive, married to damage time, and has a new set of interactions and first behind it? I would be upset if Warmind cells was as good as it used to be when they first, like, not even when they first came out, but it was like, what, a season or two after they first came out when they really started to blossom. But considering where they are now, I'll take this trade-off. Now, Strand is the first subclass to grant 3 melee charges. Yeah, I remember triple melee charges being leaked back in August last year, before we even knew the next subclass was Strand. Historically, we tend not to give players 3 melee charges by default, says Smith. But with Strand, Titan, and Warlock, we gave them 3. The Titan's melee sends you forward a considerable distance, so you're able to close the gap pretty easily by chaining 3 melees together. The speed at which you can move because of that is really high. Mobility and aerial play will be the core to all Strand subclasses, but Hunters will be the ones permanently up in the rafters. All right, so the trade-off being Hunters having the ability for more aerial and more leap there. Whereas in more X-axis environments, I think Titans are going to be really, really good because the melee lunge is very, very good. How they're going to actually tone down the damage, though, it's gonna have to be less. So it may just leave a lot of people one shot. So we'll see how that plays out. Bungie expects Hunters to create their own grapple arenas. Theoretically, Hunters have always been the high agility class, so it's no surprise that Threadrunner goes the hardest with the grapple ability. Hunter has this aspect called Widow's Silk that creates a grapple tangle at the point of impact, explains Smith. Not only does Widow's Silk create these grapple tangles, but it also gives me 2 grapple charges. So I can grapple once to create this point, and then if I grapple to that point again using my second charge, or my teammate grapples to it, it won't cost any grapple energy. If we create a chain of grapple tangles, we can all grapple for free and cover a huge distance. How much you want to bet there's going to be a jump puzzle in the new raid that is going to require a hunter creating these tangles for us to use to get across? How much y'all want to bet? It may not require it, but it may be extremely helpful. It may be extremely helpful to have that, though, right? It may just be like, yo, if you... Honestly, I think we need to have a hunter on the team for this, just in case we reach a point where it's like we need to traverse this area easily, and it may just make things a lot easier, right? So, not required, but would be helpful. Grapple tangles also negate the 5-second lockout that otherwise prevents hunters from using both charges back to back. As for why there's a lockout at all, Giannis explains the team's philosophy regarding movement abilities. We really like expressive movement. There's Dash, Shiver Strike, Cryonclasp, Thruster. But one of the things we pay a lot of attention to is what the uptime of that movement looks like. Grapple is super expressive, and we absolutely want you to have the ability to displace yourself, but you've got to make sure you're managing your ability energy economy. Okay? All right, so you will have that cooldown there, guys. He says that by chaining grapples, his team has been able to get halfway across King's Fall ship section. A carefully set up team can probably do some nonsensical things and end your frustration with some of the jumping puzzles. Bungie doesn't want to go back and reauthor old locations to add explicit grapple opportunities, though, because they want players to feel like they're almost cheating with their mastery of Strand. So again, probably not going to be required in the new raid, but it's going to be helpful. And again, some of you even mentioned it may even be for like secrets and stuff, you know, maybe getting to that hidden chest. Both developers expect to see a ton of emerging gameplay as players experiment with the Strand kit, and especially the grapple. For us, that sort of functionality is a little bit scary to put into a game like Destiny, but that's where we want to be, says Smith. We want to be slightly scared of the things that we're making because otherwise we're not pushing the envelope. I'm actually wondering, were they scared of Stasis? And giving examples of how he saved a falling teammate by throwing out a tangle for them to grapple to. Novel interactions are the depth I'm talking about, where people start to experiment with... Okay, hold on. Let me read this. Hold on. Giannis agrees and gives an example of how he saved a falling teammate by throwing out a tangle for them to grapple to. Dude, I can't tell you how many times I have fallen, or I've watched a teammate fall off the map, and I always say it, and I'm like, give me your hand. But obviously, we don't have any type of interaction to pull a guardian up. But imagine someone's fallen, you throw them a tangle, and they actually are able to pull themselves back up. But more so than this, imagine that one teammate that just can't jump worth the piss, right? and you're sitting there just waiting. And I have some of those teammates where we just have to wait on them for forever just to get through a jump puzzle, right? Now we can throw them this tangle and they can get their slow asses across. Novel interactions are the depth I'm talking about, where people start to experiment with the sandbox we've made and discover new use cases, some that we guarantee are not intended. That's a successful sandbox right there. Here are the tools, here are the rules, Godspeed, and good luck. I love that, actually. If this was Anthem, you would get banned. I'm not trying to shit on Anthem. I definitely don't wake up to do that, but I'm just saying Anthem would be like banned. Grapple isn't just about mobility. It's a powerful offensive tool. Getting the tuning of the grapple abilities right sounds like one of the hardest parts of developing Strand. We wanted the grapple to be able to read the player's mind a bit, says Smith. We also wanted it to be usable by all classes, which means it had to take up your grenade slot, which means it had to be as powerful as other grenades in a combat situation. To remedy that, we add the grapple punch, where you press the melee button while grappling, and you do this powered up third-person punch that does AoE damage and debuffs enemies. Nice. Again, we saw that a second ago. It also has increase melee damage, right? Hunters also have a particularly cool ability when using their ensnaring slam aspect that sees them do a gainer backflip. God, he's so beautiful too. Let's see. What do you have here, Tim? Okay. He just has a YouTube link. Okay. Yeah. Anybody here? I remember the first time I learned how to do a gainer. I was like literally in my aunt's pool trying to do gainers over and over for like, I don't know, like I want to say a week, and then finally got it. You know what I mean? But I probably break my back trying to do that shit now. Where were we? Before diving to the ground, suspending any nearby dudes. Again, it's easy to envision how cool that's going to be when strung together with grapples. Critical to understanding how grappling works in Destiny 2 is that you don't need to attach your rope to a surface. It's very versatile, very easy to use, says Smith. When I decide I want to grapple, all I have to do is point in a direction and hit the button. If the grapple can't reach a surface, it's going to anchor to a point in space and pull me in that direction. I don't have to determine whether I'm in a range of a surface to attach to. It's always just going to work, whether there's something there or not. To be honest, one of the biggest problems with grappling in other shooters is that depth perception is awful unless you're a savant. So Bungie's solution was to do away with any need to judge distance entirely. You just hit the button and fly. Just fly, baby. Just fly. I like that. I mean, ease of use, right? Bungie really hopes Strand isn't going to be a huge nightmare in PvP. Just remember this word. Bungie really hopes. So, obviously, we all remember what happened the last time Destiny 2 got a new subclass. Stasis shipped with a 5-second stun in PvP, says Smith, with a rueful smile. It was hard crowd control. You got frozen and couldn't really fight back. Here we wanted to avoid that. When you get suspended with Strand in PvP, you still have some movement control. You can fight back by shooting and hip fire. Oh, wow. Only in hip fire. And it doesn't feel as helpless when you get hit with the suspend debuff. Smith says that one of the big problems with making a whole new damage type and associated subclass is that Bungie is trying to build a box at the same time as the same type as deciding what should go in it. That can make it hard to foresee outcomes. Takeaway there, guys. You get suspended by Strand. You can only hip fire. Last word meta. Last word, DMT just got nerfed. So we're totally fine saying Stasis is the domain of the hard stun. Whereas Strand, we attack it more as a root initially and then iterate it, says Giannis. We wanted to come up with something clever enough to make you feel like Spider-Man while you're playing in the Imuna, but in PvP, not make somebody want to toss their controller. He also hopes that Strand won't be the only dominant flavor in PvP when Lightfall launches, but conceded it may still be just because it's the new hotness and players will be excited. Pretty happy with how it's playing right now. Ask us in 4 weeks and maybe that answer is different. So guys, the takeaway from this is that Strand is going to bend you over in PvP for the next 4 weeks. And this is Kevin and the team over there saying, we know. That's intentional. Have fun. Roaming supers are going to get a buff. Supers in Destiny generally fall into two camps: massive burst damage or running around and hitting stuff. There are notable exceptions, like Will of Radiance and Ward of Dawn, both of which offer utility in the form of damage buffs and healing. Generally, players gravitate to whatever does the most damage the quickest. Having seen some disappointment that the Titan Strand Super is a roaming variant, I want to know whether it's becoming harder to find new design spaces for supers. Both Giannis and Smith think there's plenty of room to explore. A lot of our supers right now are melt dudes in fantastic fashion, and there's totally validity to that apex power of expression, says Giannis. But one of the things we try to do, especially on the Darkness subclass, is find a different avenue. Giannis cited how the Stasis and Strand subclasses lean into using the respective keywords to create new kinds of supers. You can see the philosophy at work with the Titan Blade Fury super, which has 2 attacks, both of which use strand verbs. Smith explains the light attack is a melee, which you can chain infinitely, and the heavy attack is a projectile that comes out and suspends enemies on impact. So it is a roaming super, but it also allows me to hold enemies in place and then close the gap really quick. Note that those light attacks increase in speed as you land them, and they also sever enemies, lowering their damage output. That should help with the survivability, which has been a perennial issue with roaming supers and harder content. Speaking more philosophically, says Giannis, the team has plans for roaming supers in PvE to slot them into more compelling roles versus one-off supers. They can't go into detail yet, but Smith mentions they're looking at a damage output and orb generation as the areas for improvement. So essentially, guys, we're going to be moving to roaming supers. I mean, look, Bungie's got a dial there for damage. They amp that up, suddenly, boom, you've got people using roaming supers, right? Yeah, we just have to see how much damage it does. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. I mean, it says, you know, the light melee attack could be shite, could be amazing. You know, I don't see them nerfing other things. I just see them buffing the roaming supers. We'll see. We'll see. And it sounds like a nerf is coming. Oh my God. Okay, well, all right. It sounds like a nerf is coming to Well of Radiance. It's clear that Bungie doesn't want to just create supers that do more and more damage. We're trying to brace the community for a place where they are different mechanical outputs for supers, says Giannis. We're going to start playing with that more as time goes on. So you're going to see less variations of it. It just murders everything, and a lot more variations of it has a specific role and it applies to our team comp. Acknowledges that the danger when designing a utility-based super is threading the needle between making it useful enough, but not so useful that you feel like you have to equip it in every encounter until the end of time. The obvious example being Warlock's Well of Radiance. That's probably in the realm of too useful, says Giannis, with the kind of twinkle in his eye that suggests it's going to be nerfed sooner rather than later. Oh my God! All right, Well of Radiance, you're getting nerfed. I literally was like up here like, they're just going to buff everything. Everybody say bye, Will. Say bye, Will. Warlocks, you have to use something else, I guess. The Warlock Brood Reaver super was going to turn you into an actual goddamn spider at one point. No fucking way. Here's a wild one. Normally asking the question, what kind of crazy stuff did you cut? Results in terrible answers, because no dev wants to talk about something cool that didn't make it into the game, except Bungie apparently. The Warlock Brood Weaver super was originally going to transform you into a giant spider that launched spider eggs and had spider babies running around instead of Threadlings, says Smith. Okay, sounds amazing. Can we have that, please? Apparently not, because trying to transform the Warlock's bipedal model into an 8-legged creature required so much work that it ended up being out of the scope. Also, arachnophobia is a real thing, he adds. Can you imagine? Can you imagine, right? Some people, honestly, arachnophobia is a real thing. I don't like spiders. I don't know, man. I'm not as, like, there are people that will vacate a home if there's a spider in there. So, you know what I mean? If you had to literally become a spider and then play, you know what I mean? All right, Giannis has his own story to share. One of my favorite prototypes was an early Warlock super where you would spawn these aerial Threadlings, but they were just screebs that were T-posing, and they would slowly go towards the enemy and then shoot Threadling eggs. Oh, that's interesting. So you had these 3 T-posing screams vomiting Threadlings. It was hilarious, but also horrifying. Nightmare fuel aside, the Warlock super shipping with Lightfall still leans into the minion master fantasy. On cast, Needlestorm launches a burst of strand spikes, which detonate on impact and then turn into Threadlings that chase anyone left alive before exploding. Smith says that during development, it felt like a failure if Needlestorm played too much like a green version of a Hunter's Blade Barrage. That is true. That was actually a negative feedback point we got, he says. So we decided it should be about the armada of little green dudes that you're making. So hence the wave of those things that you make afterward. All right, Warlocks get to use Threadlings very differently to the other classes. Every strand class will be able to generate Threadlings, but Warlocks have what Smith describes as a special kinship with the explosive little critters. In the event that your Threadlings don't find a target, they'll return to the Warlock and condense down into a form that orbits you like an Arc Soul or a Child of the Old Gods. This behavior is called perching, and you can have various numbers of Threadlings perched at any time. Next time the Warlock attacks an enemies, they're going to pop off and attack it, says Smith. Threadlings can be generated in multiple ways depending on how your character is set up. For instance, using the Weaver's Call aspect. Whenever the Warlock casts a rift, They will weave 3 Threadling eggs that hatch, then hit a surface. Additional perched Threadlings will also be converted to eggs. And if you aren't interested in grappling, there's also a Threadling grenade. Giannis, who admits to being a Warlock main, but insists that means he avoids overtuning the class, explains how it works. Right, I'm sure. A totally valid behavior for Warlocks is, I'm going to consume this Threadling grenade, create a full perch, and then dump it all and have my children wreak havoc. Honestly, I know what I'll be playing on day 1. It does sound like it's the free way of playing when you think about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't even, you just consume thy grenade, cast thy rift, let your kids kill everything. You know what I mean? All right, so Stasis was once time crystals. Let's end on a fun one. Discussing how much subclass changes during the creative iteration process, Giannis has this to share. Stasis was originally going to be time crystals. It wasn't going to be cosmic ice, but we didn't want to do the generic fantasy thing of it's frost burr. We've always wanted there to be destiny interpretation of the power, something that is uniquely our game. Solar isn't just fire, it's the power of the sun. Void isn't just black holes. We're plucking sending creatures from the cosmos and sending them to convert life for us. But how did the team arrive at magical green robes binding the cosmos together? We didn't want to do an explicitly damage-focused thing, says Giannis. Early on, we decided that we were going to look at combat utility. We did a lot of work on damage mitigation, lowering the damage of enemies. That got us into the headspace of severing enemies' connection to the greater world. We started getting down the idea that everyone's connected by this extra dimensional construct that is the weave. The weave. The weave. As for the visual look of Strand, Giannis says consistency was key. We keyed off on the darkness resonance. Even on Stasis, we wanted to make sure that everything had a consistent physical language to the darkness resonance. We didn't want it to look ethereal and magical in the way that light subclasses do. But another way, the darkness subclasses are about physicality. And if Stasis has crystals, then Strand has strings. That started to inform the rest of the power base, says Giannis. What can we do with the strings that we couldn't do before? Oh, and we're going to have rope weapons. We began talking about grappling hooks. The visuals started becoming clear. It's all discovery. We started from the first point of dark telekinesis, and we had a bunch of other goals that then led us down another path. In my experience, you can have a plan laid out, but you need to afford yourself that room for discovery. I promise you, the plan in your head will not work out the way you think it does. Wonderful article. I love seeing like where things start off and then what it becomes, right? Great article again, Tim Cook. Let's link that article down below, and also link Tim's socials there over on Twitter if y'all want to check them out.
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.